Something happened between Donald Trump and Pope Leo XIV that the Vatican simply never saw coming. And I don't mean the tweets. I don't mean the true social broadsides. I mean something structural. Something that may have permanently altered the political power of this papacy before it even got started. Because here's the question nobody in the legacy media is asking. How does the first American pope in 2,000 years of church history, a man who came out of the gate with the full backing of the globalist left, with breathless media coverage, how does that man end up in a position where he has to publicly walk back his own words? Something happened. And when you see exactly what Trump did and why it worked, you're going to understand not just this conflict, but the entire civilizational battle that's building underneath it. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your patron professor, here to help you make sense of the madness with breaking news and analysis you're not going to get anywhere else. So you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. I'm sure you all know that Pope Leo, the first American pope from Chicago, as it turns out, he has a history of pushing politically leftist talking points. He's good buds with Obama's right-hand man, David Axelrod. I'm sure you all know that he and President Trump, let's just say, don't see eye to eye on things. And we found that out, ironically, on Easter Sunday, when President Trump chose that moment to post a social media threat to Iran that was really graphic. It was really scorched earth. It even shocked his own supporters. The president promised the end of an entire civilization in Iran is just hours away if Iran did not comply with the military deadline of 8 p.m. that evening. Now, ironically, again, the threat worked. Iran capitulated. They blinked. And a ceasefire was agreed to that's held up ever since for nearly a month. But Pope Leo saw things very differently. He decided, for whatever reason, that it would be a good idea to insert himself into this geopolitical conflict. He called Trump's threat to destroy the regime, he said entire civilization, as truly unacceptable. Those are the words he used. He said attacks on civilian infrastructure were, quote, violations of international law and represented the hatred, division, and destruction that humanity is capable of. Now, despite the fact that the international law he appealed to has gone the way of the dodo bird, despite him appealing to anachronistic forms of law and international protocol and precedent, it didn't matter. The liberal globalist media absolutely lost their minds with joy over this. CNN, Al Jazeera, Rolling Stone, USA Today, they ran breathless pieces about how this first American pope was going to be the moral hammer that finally brought down Donald J. Trump. Al Jazeera ran an op-ed titled, "The Pope has shown the world how to stand up to Trump." USA Today warned that Trump's feud with Leo was dividing Catholics. And now the globalists had found their new champion. And they were giddy. They were so excited. Again, even Bill Maher was somewhat taken aback when these liberal globalist outlets that normally are very critical of the papacy suddenly see the Pope as their new champion. But then Trump did what he always does. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He went on Truth Social, and he unloaded. He called Leo weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy. He said, I don't want a pope who thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. He said, I don't want a pope who criticizes the president of the United States because I'm doing exactly what I was elected in a landslide to do. And then Trump dropped what may be the most audacious line any sitting American president has ever directed at a sitting pope. He wrote that he wasn't on any list to be on pope. He's talking about Robert Prevost, right, who Leo was before becoming pope. He wasn't on any list to be pope. He was only there because he was an American. And they thought that he would be the best one to deal with President Donald J. Trump. If I wasn't in the White House, this is Trump, he said, if I wasn't in the White House, Leo wouldn't be in the Vatican. Gang, you have to let that sink in for a moment. The President of the United States just publicly stated on the global stage that the Pope of Rome owes him his job. If Trump weren't in office, Leo wouldn't be anywhere near the papacy today. And if you thought the escalation stopped there, well, let's just say it didn't. I'm hiccuping over that. Here's what President Trump had to say just the other day.
Message do you hope he delivers to the Holy Father?
Well, I can tell you this, that as far as the Pope is concerned, and it's very simple. Whether I make him happy or I don't make him happy, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And he seemed to be saying that they can. And I say they cannot. Because if that happened, the entire world would be hostage, and we're not going to let that happen. That's my only message.
And Catholics largely agree with the president over the Pope. A poll released in the midst of the height of their conflict found that Trump actually gained support among Catholics. He gained support. This Pope, when all is said and done, is not particularly that popular among more conservative Catholic laity. Trump himself exposed then Robert Prevost's own X account when he was cardinal. And he showed, and by the way, it was subsequently deleted after he was chosen to be Pope, but it didn't matter. We found out that it was filled with far-left retweets and political approvals that the church clearly did not want the world to see. But Trump reposted them before they were completely scrubbed. And what they revealed was a Pope with a distinctly partisan left-wing political lean, one that the media was perfectly happy to weaponize against the elected president of the United States. But I think the key reason why Trump got the upper hand on Pope Leo is he exposed his radical and frankly embarrassing hypocrisy, his utterly selective moral outrage. Trump pointed out that when Iran executed tens of thousands of its own people, innocent people in the streets just weeks ago, Leo was crickets. He said nothing. The Catholic Church, the Vatican, was silent. Not one word. A staggering silence given Leo's injecting of himself into the conflict without applying his moral standard consistently. You know, Trump bad, but mullahs, And as such, Leo is walking in the footsteps of his predecessor, Francis, who consistently defended third worlders around the globe, all the while excoriating the supposed crimes and ills of the very Western civilization that gave him the cathedrals he sits in. Bottom line, one leader is willing to defend Western civilization, while the other consistently looks the other way, and whose defense of the third world literally knows no bounds. So what's really going on here between Trump and the Pope? That is what we're about to find out. But first, let me ask you a serious question. If you could earn consistent double-digit returns guaranteed by law, would you still risk your money in volatile markets? Because most investments today come with a catch. I recently came across a method that works completely differently from a friend of mine. His name's Jay. It's backed by government authority. The returns are set by state law, and you can literally test the waters with as little as $50. No market timing, no complicated strategies, no dealing with tenants, no rehabs, and it doesn't take over your life either. Just a couple of spare hours a week. That's it. Now, here's the part that really caught my attention. This is the kind of predictable, law-based return strategy that banks and hedge funds have quietly been using for years, but it's a strategy that's been hidden and kept secret from most everyday Americans. But that's starting to change. So I asked Jay how long it would take him to teach me, and he told me he could break the entire thing down and actually walk through it live in less than an hour. And that's when I asked him to do the same for you, my audience, and he agreed. Jay is hosting a free live masterclass this Tuesday, May 12th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, where he'll show you exactly how the strategy works, why the returns are guaranteed by law, and how everyday Americans can get started with very little time and very little money. But it's live only, no replays. So go to turleyclass.com to register. That's turleyclass.com, or just text Turley to 72000, 72,000, or scan the QR code on your screen, tap send, and you're in. Again, Tuesday, May 12th at 8 p.m. Eastern, if you want predictable returns without the risk, volatility, and complexity of traditional investing. I'll see you in this masterclass. Register now at turleyclass.com. Text Turley to 72,000 or scan the QR code to save your spot. What we have to understand here is that this rift between the Pope and the President is the latest and most dramatic battle in a much larger civilizational war over who speaks authoritatively for the Christian West. The progressive wing of the Catholic Church, which has dominated the Vatican bureaucracy since the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, understands something with perfect clarity. It understands that if Catholic voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin stay with Trump and Vance through 2028, the liberal project in America is finished. Nearly 60% of Catholics voted for Trump in 2024. So the Vatican deployed the one political asset in their theopolitical arsenal that they had left, the moral authority of the papacy itself. They elected an American pope, a Chicagoan no less, precisely because they believed he would be the most effective instrument for peeling Catholic conservatives away from the Trump coalition. And I think Trump was right. It does appear to have been a deliberate strategy. And by all appearances, it has failed. And it failed because of the massive rift, the chasm that's opened up between the political orientation of the Vatican, which we might describe as the Davos Vatican, given their alliance with the World Economic Forum and Leo's ridiculous blessing of a block of ice at a climate summit. There's this massive chasm between the Davos Vatican and the values, interests, and concerns of the vast majority of American Catholics that want nothing to do with Davos Vatican values. That Vatican tries to present itself as politically neutral when in reality, it's long been recognized that it's been systematically co-opted by international left-wing ideology, open borders, global governance, radical climate alarmism, and it consistently deploys that ideology against nationalist, populist, and sovereignty-based political movements that rank and file Catholics overwhelmingly support. So the Vatican isn't just setting itself up against Trump. It's setting itself up against the very Catholic voters who fill their pews, those pews every Sunday. But at a larger scale, I think what we're watching here is the emergence of what scholars call theopolitics as the defining battleground of 21st century global politics. The reemergence of religion, not as a soft cultural backdrop, but as a central driver of international relations, electoral coalitions, and civilizational identity, is the biggest political story that the legacy media has no framework whatsoever to understand or explain. So on one side, you got what I call Davos Vatican, the progressive wing of a global institution that speaks the language of human dignity in the gospel while aligning itself with open borders, supranational governance, and the managed decline of the Christian West. On the other, you got Trump and Vance and the world they represent, a civilizational nationalism that fuses Christian heritage, national sovereignty, and a willingness to use military and economic power in unapologetic defense of Western interests. And the American Catholic laity, from Tom Homan, our border czar, to the millions of faithful in those pews, they've chosen a side. They chose it in 2016, they chose it again in 2020, and they chose it yet again in 2024. And as a result, Leo has been forced to blink more than once. He walked back his original tyrant's comment. He said he's not a politician, that he has no interest in getting involved in American politics or starting a war with Donald Trump. He's right now, as we speak, meeting with Marco Rubio today to obviously smooth out things between Washington and the Vatican. But I would argue in many ways it's too late. Trump has effectively exposed the political project embedded in this papacy. Trump has forced the Vatican to come to him diplomatically, publicly, unmistakably. He's demonstrated to 60+% of American Catholics that their spiritual leader was being used as a political instrument by the same globalist left that lost them in 2024. And he's made it impossible for Pope Leo to function as the progressive movement's champion without paying a massive credibility cost every single time he tries. John Paul II changed the world by wielding the moral authority of the papacy with the grain, along the grain of Western civilization, in alliance with Reagan and Thatcher against Soviet communism. Pope Leo is trying to wield that same moral authority, but against the grain, against the elected president of the United States, against the democratic will of the Catholic majority in America, in alignment instead with Axelrod and Davos and the legacy media. And Donald Trump hit back hard, repeatedly, publicly. The era of top-down progressive papal politics aimed at American conservatives is over. The message has been sent, and Leo knows it. And if he doesn't, President Trump will be all too willing and able to remind him.